Let me just begin by thanking Mr. Navteej Johar, who gave me this opportunity of visiting Delhi after 7 years. It's exciting. I have been here for some time, and meeting old friends, and so it's really nice. Apart from the fact that I'm getting an opportunity to share these ideas with you, I would also like to thank Madam Kapila Vatsya, and that she has made it here. It's really it means a lot to me. So what I am going to do is that for almost an hour, and that's what I have possibly, is that, see, what I have in front of me is basically a sort of part of this introductory introductory abstract of a book which I'm trying to put together. And I'm afraid there might not be a lot of rasa here because there is lots of, I'm trying to make a base for rasa. I mean, trying to understand the skeleton, and I'm supposed to yet put meat on the skeleton, which is all coming from rasa, eventually. However, what I'll be doing is that I'll try to contextualize the idea of rasa, the theory of rasa in Abhinavagupta's Abhinava Bharati, particularly just to the Rasa Adhyaya, without going into the text because it would be complicated. And I'll try to contextualize that in the Anuttaratrika Shaiva system that Abhinavagupta belongs to. So partly I'm going to read, partly wherever I feel there is explanation needed, I'll try to explain more. I don't know how many of you will be very clearly able to follow me, because there are lots of technicalities as well. I mean, I will be just blabbering in Sanskrit some things here and there. I hope everything, I'll try to go slow, but I hope it will be fine. Abhinav Gupta is an unusual literary figure belonging to pre-modern South Asia and is recognized for his major contributions to diverse domains of knowledge, primarily philosophy, theology, and aesthetics. He is usually associated either with what is popularly known as Kashmir Shaivism or with the Sanskrit aesthetic theory of rasa or relish. The former is an historically problematic designation for non-dualist Shaivism, of which Abhinavagupta is one of the main representatives. In what follows, I'll map an outline of the development of intellectual history in context of Abhinavagupta. I'll closely look at the possible parallels between what otherwise might be regarded as two different traditions. So the theistic non-dualist Shaiva tradition and the aesthetic Rasa tradition. I'll attempt, even though extremely peripherally, to look at Abhinavagupta's Rasa theory through his Anuttaratrika Shaivism. To achieve my aim, I will have to spend more time discussing about the latter and point out its possible connections with the former. While scholars like David Peter Lawrence and Sthaneshwar Timalsina have argued that Abhinavagupta's aesthetic theory can be used to understand Shaiva soteriological model, I have argued that there is a possibility of studying this model the other way around. In other words, I believe that Abhinavagupta's Rasa theory can be better understood in alignment with his non-dual theistic Shaiva metaphysics. There is no doubt that there is an intricate relationship between the two. However, I strongly believe that the two theoretical systems do complement each other. Abhinavagupta, maintaining his usual esoteric nature of his style and the approach with which he develops his discipline, does not eventually articulate anything much about this relationship. I'll explain why. And yet an extensive exploration into his works makes it clear enough that he was very subtly allowing an exchange to take place between the two traditions. So what is our agenda of exploration at the first place? The crucial questions, those will be our concern here, are: is Abhinavagupta appropriating, this word is very important, appropriating the idea of rasa to fit within his Shaiva soteriological model? How closely is the aesthetic world of Abhinavagupta appropriated by him in relation to his rationalistic theistic world? Does aesthetic relishing mean self-reflecting? I'm focusing also on the pratyabhigna idea he has, and self-recognizing, as he would use the idiom of pratyabhigna, the philosophy of recognition. What is the ontology of aesthetic experience for him? That's something really important, because that's what he's doing eventually. And you would see what I'm saying. Can aesthetic experience be the experience of Shivahood? right? These are some of the fundamental questions. I don't know if I'm able to answer all, but then at least the discussion will begin. Before discussing these questions in particular, I should spend some time in situating the topic in its theoretical and historical context. One of the foremost things to keep in mind is that Abhinavagupta belongs to what I have called the age of reason, where he wants to present his teachings following clear logical argument, what he calls sattarka. Indeed, one of the most significant tasks that Abhinavagupta was engaged in was providing critical philosophical structure to the teachings of the Trika Shaiva scriptures. I'll later, those of you who are not very familiar with the idea of Trika Shaiva scriptures, what I mean by that, I'll come to that in a while. But that's the system he belonged to, and you see that he's making unceasing efforts. Rather, that was the demand of the age and era as well, that he's trying to make these unceasing efforts of rationalizing the earlier Shaiva texts. And you would see that that's exactly what he's also doing with Abhinavabharati, for instance, right? At least very clearly in the Rasa Prakarana there. Indeed, one of the most significant tasks that Abhinavagupta was engaged in was providing critical philosophical structure to the teachings of the Trika Shaiva scriptures. This is also something that he's clearly engaged in attempting to achieve in his Rasadhyaya as well, where he strongly seems to plead, now mark the words, where he strongly seems to plead for an ontological status for the ninth rasa. The rasa of tranquility, Shanta rasa. I'll come back to that, gradually. A master of his exegetical craft, Abhinavagupta mines and even manipulates his sources, making use of their teachings to counter the arguments of his opponents. A central purpose in his philosophical rationalization of the Trika scriptures is to counter antagonistic contemporaries such as the staunch followers of Shaiva Siddhanta ritualism, who embrace philosophical dualism. However, unfortunately, in case of his commentary on the great treatise on dramaturgy, the Natya Shastra Abhinavabharati, even though he is criticizing and building upon the commentaries and arguments of his predecessors, none of these commentaries are available to us today. What, however, is available is the paraphrases of main theses of these commentators by Abhinavagupta himself. And in the absence of these original commentaries, we will never be able to know how much of what Abhinavagupta is saying is actually his recrafting of the earlier interpreters. What we do, however, understand is that he has made an unceasing effort to fit his aesthetic position into his Shaiva theological model. This is particularly true in case of the theory of rasa. On a closer look, it becomes very clear that Abhinavagupta's higher non-dualism, that is Paramadvaya Drishti, is itself as much made of the doctrinal principles of the dualistic Shaiva Siddhanta. One thing which is very important to keep in mind is that before roughly 9th century, 9th, 10th, early 10th, you have Shaiva Siddhantavadins, the dualists, whose doctrinal position is dualist. You have them, being the kings in Kashmir at that point of time, right? Their simple doctrinal idea, which I think I'm going to talk about somewhere, is that you can never be Shiva. You can raise to the level of Shiva. The idea of moksha is very different, right? You can raise to the level of Shiva, but you can not be one with that. You cannot be one with Shiva. What does it mean to be one? I'll come back to that, because even in Advaita system, you don't need to be one with Shiva. That idea doesn't occur. I'll explain why. But Abhinavagupta, you see, what he is doing is that one very central thing that he's engaged in doing is that he's opposing the Shaiva Siddhanta, the dualist propounders, saying that you consider that this moksha can be achieved only by something called diksha, right? Because diksha for them, for the dualists, was like a dravya, or like a substance, if you read earlier these agamas, they very often describe it something like on a copper plate you have this kind of blackish moss and kind of corrosion, right? That is mala for them, that is dravya, and that can only be get away with doing something ritualistic, like physical ritual, right? Now for Abhinavagupta, the whole game changes. He's like, no, it's possible through knowledge. right? It's possible through knowledge. Now, that becomes a problem. What do you mean by knowledge at the first place? When you say that, oh, you can achieve moksha through knowledge, what do you mean, right? Okay? And those ideas of knowledge he has, he goes back to what just Mr. Jauhar was saying. Sorry about that. I'm coming. Intensification of the meditative practices, right? That is very important for him, which for the Siddhantavadins is not something that they accept. It's not possible for them. For them, it's only ritual, the physical ritual, which leads to the apavarga, the moksha. They don't even consider this idea of purnatva, what I'll talk in brief. This indeed is also true about his aesthetic commentary on the Natya Shastra. Abhinava should be seen as much reworking on the older commentators and their interpretations as he is developing his own new system of aesthetics. Now, when I say here new system of aesthetics, I do not mean that he's emerging, he's coming up with completely new school of aesthetics, Kavya Shastra or something. No, but then there's enough newness that is attached to what he is trying to say, which he is doing also in the tantric side, right? And you see that also in his aesthetic side, right? I mean, and I'll talk about that. This process of philosophical rationalization that Abhinavagupta is engaged with is crucial to understand, for it is there where the answer to many bigger questions lie. Abhinavagupta is even accused of hijacking the main thesis of Bharata Muni as far as the idea of rasa is concerned. He is accused of appropriating the idea of rasa to fit into his Shaiva theological point of view. And indeed, that is what he seems to be doing. But then the question would be, what is the nature of creativity anyway? He obviously is not misrepresenting anything. He has erected in front of us this lofty edifice of aesthetic world, the deeper implications of which we hardly appreciate and understand. And his creative genius lies in how he has managed to develop what I may call the Shaiva aesthetic universe. But this synthesis and appropriation is not always evident, since we are dealing with special scripture, that is to say, I'm translating Vishesha Shastra as opposed to the common scripture Samanya Shastra. When I say Vishesha Shastra, I have in mind also because it's a Rahasya Shastra, he's very clear about that, right? Abhinavagupta weaves it into a mystically esoteric language. The deep implications hidden in the esotericism of Abhinavagupta often emerge from Kali Kula praxis. Now, mysterious word, I'll come to that, I'll explain that gradually. What is Kali, Kula and Krama systems? The complex nature of these implications is not always unambiguous, since it is meant for advanced practitioners of Kaula order. And more secret the teachings are, as Abhinavagupta himself claims, more esoteric the language becomes, so that it is accessible only to the advanced practitioners who are the sole people who can understand the encoded language. Thus, following the esoteric teachings of his masters, which is mostly Utpaladeva, Abhinavagupta says that the secret instructions should neither be revealed all at once, nor they be completely hidden from the practitioners. In alignment with what I have just mentioned above, when we examine Abhinavagupta's Shaiva world itself and try seeing it in proximity with his aesthetic theory, the situation becomes more complex. I say the situation becomes more complex because his Shaiva system itself is working at different platforms. I have argued elsewhere that Abhinavagupta's fundamental philosophical intuition is basically rooted in Krama tradition. Again, I'll try to say something about Krama tradition in a short while. And his polemical discussions are deeply embedded in his Shaiva theological metaphysics. He cannot be seen only confined to Pratyabhijna, that is the philosophy of recognition system, and thus his logical epistemological interpretations are thus a single dimension of what his larger project was. While in the Ishvara Pratyabhijna Vimarshini and the Ishvara Pratyabhijna Vivritti Vimarshini, Abhinavagupta was building upon the Pratyabhijna based Trika. Now these are his works. I'm just only referring to them, what he broadly is trying to do in these other works. In the Tantra Loka, he engaged in crafting a Trika grounded in the Krama cult of Kali. These are, I wonder if it is difficult. I mean, I don't know. It's difficult to understand because this is lots of this jargon of like, you know, the tradition of texts, for instance, but which is very fundamental to understand because remember, it's a very strong textual tradition. And if you don't understand what these texts are talking to themselves, their genres are talking to themselves, right? You have to be, there are things hidden in their structures, right? That's very important to understand, okay? In the Tantra Loka, he engaged in crafting a trika grounded in the Krama cult of Kali. In addition to this, in his Anuttara Prakriya, which is basically represented by the Paratrishika Vivarana, he is shaping the trika immersed in Kula Prakriya. But where are these texts connected with Abhinava's aesthetic ideas, and what are these possible connections? To explore a few possible connections, I have selected a few vital concepts in Abhinavagupta, and I would like to share my observations with you. That said, I think the most problematic part of this presentation would be my thesis of seeing a possible relationship of what on the tantric side he calls Anupaya, and means without means, and in the aesthetic side what he establishes, you know, the Shanta Rasa idea, the tranquility Rasa, right? So my thesis is, and I may be wrong, but in my recent conversation with someone like Professor Navajivan Rastogi, he was very excited when I just shared with this idea with him. He was like, I'm not worried about the new generation anymore. But yeah, it's very evident, you know, if you try to read these two ideas in these two different platforms, it's very clear, gradually becoming very clear to me that what he is trying to do, right? But I'm afraid it's not easy to explain all that, you know, even to go into the text and try to exactly give my observations to you. It needs a lot of time, it needs lots of patience as well, to tell you that what I feel, like, you know, why I'm saying what I'm saying, you know, because there's a close reading of the text. I being a philologist, I know, so it's complicated. It would be true to say that even though Abhinavagupta is wanting to engage with a diverse range of dynamic disciplines, however, the connecting factor permeating in all of them is the notion of radical non-dualism, which is what I think Naute just said. You know, it's a radical non-dualistic notion that is holding all his systems together. He wants to establish the same reality using many diverse functional platforms. At the ontological level, which I would just talk a bit about in some time, at the ontological level, through its application with respect to the ontic realities, I translate the word tattva as ontic realities. So you know the Sankhya model of tattvas, and you know there is also Shaiva model of tattvas. I'll show you a sort of this picture. Through its application with respect to the ontic realities, that is tattvas, he seeks to establish that the universe is an inverse reflection of the divine. At the phenomenological level, he describes the yogic practices prescribed in the Trika Shaivism. From the epistemological point of view, the Shaiva theory is being advocated through the doctrine of recognition, pratyabhijna. From the point of view of the philosophy of language, Abhinava explains his theory of phonemic emanation using the theory of reflection, since for him language is an essential form of reality, and the doctrine of Shaivism also operates in his aesthetic theory of rasa, where he claims that the process of identification, that is to say sadharanikarana, which is basically coming from, you know, his predecessor, his guru Bhattanayaka actually, is the manifestation of the reflection of the performer in the heart of the spectator. Now you see what I'm trying to do here. I'm trying to contextualize it. I'm trying to contextualize it in this larger, bigger canvas that Abhinavagupta has. And I'm trying to put in front of you this one dot of rasa, you know, this idea of rasa. How does it work? Where does it lie in this large, really large, magnanimous canvas that Abhinavagupta has, right? And then you have to be able to understand and, you know, the relationships of one with the other, right? And unfortunately, you know, lots of people, what they do when I talk to them, you know, there's no logic you can apply there. We are talking of, for God's sake, pre-modern world. It's very different. It functions very differently, right? It's 11th, 10th century, and, you know, it's a different world altogether, right? nonetheless, obviously, he goes to Nyaya and Mimamsa and other things. He's aware of what he's doing. It's not that he's not aware of that. Okay, let me begin by exploring the idea of mala. I have lots of things. I hope I'll be able to cover, I don't know how much, but let's see. Let me begin by exploring the idea of mala. I have translated mala as impurity. Impurity is a very bad word for mala. I don't know, there is no probably other fitting word, but it's always a complicated problem that, how do you translate? Prakasha is light. I'm going to give you a lot of light as in Prakasha, but I don't know, you can't have perfect translations except making the L of the light capital. Let me begin by exploring the idea of mala, impurity. That is quite a fundamental notion both in the dualistic and the non-dualistic Shaiva currents. The Shaiva Siddhanta was a tradition placing considerable importance on ritual, which I just told you some time back, both doctrinally and in praxis, believing emancipation essentially transpires through the salvific power of Shaiva initiation, what they called Diksha. Abhinava, on the other hand, endeavors to establish a system emphasizing the paramount significance of knowledge, jnana. Thus, he attacked the perceived ritualism of his Shaiva Siddhanta contemporaries who adhered to doctrinal dualism. In Trika, the absence of knowledge was taught to be the true cause of impurity, mala, which obscures the soul's inherent Shiva nature, Shivatva. This impurity, that is mala, is nothing but ignorance. See, for him, it is ignorance that is mala. It is not dravya anymore, right? It is not a substance like dualists earlier. He says it is just ajnana. It is the... But again, what one has to be very careful with, ajnana for him is not absence of knowledge. This is very important. There is where he fundamentally also sometimes disagrees with Vedantins, because for him, the ajnana idea is apurna jnana. That is to say, there is lesser knowledge. All you have to do to get the knowledge, you already have knowledge, right? I mean, because of this mala, for dualists it's dravya, but for him there's a certain ajnana mala which has been casted on you, because of which you're not able to perceive the reality, and that is just this veil, that is casted on you, and that is ajnana veil. That is to say, in other words, the ajnana is the apurna jnana, is the lesser knowledge, right? The time you make it complete, there you are. That's your job. That's the only thing you have to do. You have to turn the apurna jnana into purna jnana. And this is exactly how it will work in the realm of rasa, right? It is that rasa is, it's not that rasa is missing anywhere, it's not that it is not there. The not there-ness does not exist. It is there everywhere. You just have to make an effort, have conducive atmosphere to get it manifested, to let it manifest. That's why his system, and now I understand why people like Professor K.C. Pandey, he emphasized so much the idea of abhasavada. It is abhasavada, and abhasavada is nothing but this bhati, prakashayati. I mean, it's manifesting. The light is illuminating. So it comes into being, right? And that is the idea of rasa. You have some point of time with whatever, situation or congenial atmosphere, you have a certain thing being manifested. It's there. It's just a matter of manifesting, right? So I think that's what I'm sort of trying to talk here a bit. I say that in the aesthetic realm, one can understand the same idea of incompleteness, apurnatva, of jnana, that is knowledge, represented by the non-immaculate entity called mala, that may not allow the rasa experience to take place in the heart of the connoisseur or the spectator. The complete manifestation of the rasa takes place in a spectator when he or she is overflowing with the experience of joy, purna ananda. Now, it's so sad being a Sanskritist. I mean, you have to speak in English, but then when you talk of purna ananda, overflowing with joy, I don't have better language. What can I do? But it really, in Sanskrit, it would mean overflowing. It's like this. You have the Pepsi can, right? It's full of that thing. You just open and it's bursting, right? And that is what he's talking about. It's just bursting. There's this overflow of joy, right? Within this entity, whatever the entity may be. The complete manifestation of rasa takes place in a spectator when he or she is overflowing with the experience of joy, purna ananda, and this can only happen in a connoisseur who is absolutely sensitive with respect to a certain emotion, bhava, or is in the possession of a sensitive or an immaculate heart, sahridaya, right? So the idea of sahridaya is nothing but your heart should be pure. Now, what does it mean, pure? Pure means absent. I mean, I can explain in Sanskrit, it's very easy. You have absence of mala is purity. That's what he explains very often. So you have to get away with total mala so that, you have the complete pure heart, right? A number of spectators watching a certain performance will have the same number of experiences. In other words, each spectator's experience will be different even if all of them are watching the same performance. Here the hierarchy of malas, because then again there is hierarchy of malas. There is 1, 2, 3, and you have different upayas, you have different means of getting away with them. Here the hierarchy of malas is in play. To have the total rasa experience, so you see how I'm struggling. I'm using sometimes total, sometimes purna, sometimes something. I'm using this idiom because I have to struggle, translating these ideas into some other language, which here is English, obviously. To have the total rasa experience, one's heart needs to be completely immaculate, like a spotless shining mirror, in which the total image of performance, right? I mean, you're watching a performance and you're watching the total performance, right? You're watching the completeness of it. You're not looking only at like, oh, wait, one character. You're looking at this totality picture of it, right? And that totality picture, there are lots of elements in there. They will be adding, even if knowingly or unknowingly, they will be adding to the totality idea, right? So there is dress, for instance. There is act, for instance. There is, stage, for instance. Everything, right? In other words, the only way one can have a spotless heart is to remove impurities out of it, and the only way I'm saying upaya, to remove impurities, mala, out of it is to get the heart back to its natural state, right? Get the heart back to its natural state, what he calls reposing, right? Vishranti, what he would call late. I'll come back to that later. I.e., that is to say, full of purity, which is what Abhinavagupta calls Nairmalya, right? The idea of Nairmalya is completely synonymous. Now, there is another dynamics now coming into picture. He calls it Nairmalya, but this is what, in his metaphysics, Shaiva metaphysics, these are just the basis of it, the elements. He calls it Prakasha, right? The light. This nirmalata, this complete purity is nothing but light, right? And the idea of nirmalya is completely synonymous with the concept of prakasha in his Trika Shaivism, as also it is an alternate for sahridaya in his aesthetic world, right? As I just said some time back. For the Siddhanta liberation meant attaining equality. Okay, I've said that earlier. But the other thing which is important is, according to Abhinavagupta, the means, now we are talking of means, right? Upayas. And the goal. There are two things, right? I mean, you have to achieve a goal. I will gradually, what I will try to do, I'll try to create this binary. I think I should have it somewhere. I'll try to create this binary, and there is something beyond binary. Right? When we are talking of the idea of prakasha and vimarsha, then there is something beyond prakasha and vimarsha. You see, prakasha is important. He would talk. It's a traditional method. He would talk in terms of etymology. The idea of prakasha is coming into light. Right? The time I say, and that's the reason he's using something like the idea of prakasha. I say prakasha. Is this the act of happening of light? Right? What is it? When I say prakasha, see, one is verbal idea, right? I mean, prakasha, how do I prove the existence of prakasha? Something coming into being. So you have two elements at the same time. That I say light and the happening of light. They're one dynamic thing, right? That is what the dynamic part of it is, the vimarsha. what in English again you have to say reflective awareness, right? That is the dynamic side of the prakasha. And they are, as you cannot take away the lightness from light, right? You cannot take away, if there is light, either there is darkness, right? If there is light, you cannot take away lightness from light, right? They're just integral. That's exactly how in his system Shiva and Shakti are, right? I'll come back to this, trying to establish the relationship between the spectator and the spectated, because you have Shiva and Shakti, who is nothing but in his aesthetic realms, spectator and spectated, right? In a different sense, obviously you can't, as I said, you can't apply logic everywhere. You can't go like, in here even, you can't try to, apply logic upside down and say, oh yeah, this is not, but how do you explain? That would be very, very difficult. I mean, unless there is a good reason that, that is not something that one cannot explain. So coming to this idea of upaya and upeya, that is to say the means and the goal. According to Abhinavagupta, means and the goal are two distinct ways of representing the same reality from the absolute point of view. There is no distinction between the two of them. This is explained by Abhinava using the binary, that is to say the light and the reflective awareness in the Shaiva metaphysics. On the other hand, from the theological point of view, it also translates into integrating Shiva and Shakti. Shakti, or reflective awareness, functions as the only means to reach Shiva. This is quite fundamental because, in his system, which is basically the Shaiva Shakta system, because it is Shakta oriented. The Shakti is an integral part of Shiva there. You can't separate them. I'm not talking of Puranic gods, the calendar gods. I'm talking of ontic realities in his system, right? You can't separate them. They are in union. And if they have to, okay, I'm making it complicated. I'll come back to that because there are other things which I have to tell you in that context. Shakti, or reflective awareness, functions as the only means to reach Shiva, or in other words, integrating the means with the goal is like the process of reflection that takes place only when Shiva is able to make cognizance of his real nature in the reflective medium of Shakti, which is basically nothing but an integral form of himself. Just as the luminosity of light is not different from the light itself, in the same way Vimarsha is nothing but very nature of Prakasha. The totality of light which pervades or envelopes everything is beyond the binary of light and reflective awareness. Thus, when Abhinavagupta refers to Prakasha, he is actually referring to both Prakasha and Vimarsha. The plurality of manifestation is inherently present in the unity of consciousness, according to Abhinavagupta. See, he gives a couple of examples which I often give. Obviously, he does that all the time. One example he gives of the Mayuranda Rasanyaya. That is to say that there is a maxim saying that the plasma of peahens, or if you use peacock's egg, it is white, right? I mean, there's no color inside. But when the child, the hen comes out and then it manifests into peacock, where is that color coming from, right? There was no color there inherently present in the beginning, right? Under certain circumstances, it is manifested. It is present there in inherent form, but it is manifesting when it gets its proper circumstances, and it manifests and color comes into being. The same way, for instance, he talks about this the seed. There's a tree in a seed in the hidden form. It's there and it's present there. You can't say it is not there. It's under certain circumstances the tree comes out of the, you put it there and the big tree comes out of. So he would say in Paratrishika Vivarana, for instance, Yathanya Grodha Bijastha Shakti Rupo Mahadrumaha. There is Shakti there, inherently present there. So Mahadruma is the big tree. It is inherently present there. Tatha Hridaya Bijastham Vishwameta Characharam. And in the same sense, in the Hridaya Bija, Hridaya is very important. Again, we'll come back to that in the aesthetics, also in the tantric realm. And this world, this whole, when I say world, you have to understand I'm using the Sanskrit, not samsara, because samsara has a different connotation. Samsarati, it has the cycle idea coming and going. I'm saying Vishwa, right? I mean, there's nothing out of that, nothing beyond that. Everything. I'm saying everything. And you, in English, I can just put E capital for you, but nothing else I can do, bro, right? So these examples he uses for this idea of where does this plurality lie, the Vimarsha Shakti, where is that lying? In the Prakasha itself, but in inherent dormant form. It's only because of the complete autonomous nature, complete Sampurna Swatantri Shakti of Shiva that he sometimes wants to be too, right? So he extends it, and you have this sphara, the extension, right? This is important for us to keep in mind when we are evaluating the subjective and objective experiences of a spectator and spectated respectively. In Abhinavagupta's aesthetic realm, it is the subject or the spectator who is of the prime importance, because the real experience is the experience of the one who is experiencing it. I'm sounding like a jargon, right? So, in short, what I'll tell you what he seems to be saying is that, see, in his Shaiva system, what he strongly adheres to this idea of that subjective, there is binary, right? Subjective is real, right? That's what he says. You would see that later also in his Pratyabhijna idea, that what is the locus of a cognition, right? There in analytical idea he goes, where is the locus of cognition? I'm coming to know this mic, I see this, I realize, I understand. Where is that happening? Where is that happening? Is that happening outside here? Is that happening there? I'm seeing a man here. Where is the cognition taking place? The cognition is taking place in consciousness, what he calls samvit, right? So the cognition is taking place there. So this is as real, for instance, as anything else, right? Because I'm imposing my consciousness on this, something what you may otherwise call, it can be reduced down to, something, okay? Now look at the idea of spectator and the spectated as well, right? Unless I, as a spectator, I'm watching this performance, right? There's a performance happening in front of me. Now I was just a couple of weeks back in Heguru talking to students there. So one of the students, she asked me that, okay, so what happens that I say I have to act a character of someone who has broken leg, right? So, I mean, I won't be able to feel that emotion, right? I mean, how can I feel that emotion? I'm acting it, but I won't be able to feel that emotion. And I said, there you go. You won't be able to feel the emotion exactly, right? How possibly a lame person would be able to feel it, right? But I would be, because I'm watching it. For me, you're manifesting as lame to me. So for me, it's real. That's why for Abhinavagupta, imagination is not something which is not real. Creativity is not something which is not real, right? It is very much real. It's very much real. And that's why he's asking for, eventually you would see, he's asking for this ontological status for something what is paradoxical otherwise. Saying that, imagine. It is imagination. Imagination, does it mean necessarily when it is imagination it is unreal? Often we try, it's imaginative, you're in the world of imagination. He's like, yes, but that as imagination is real, right? And he would play with the idea of reflection, for instance, because if you look at the mirror, for instance, you look at your face in the mirror, yes, this is your face as reality, as face, but this can't be real as reflection. As you have in a mirror your own reflection of your face, that is real as reflection, right? Okay? I'm going everywhere, sorry. Okay, but there would be important things. You can keep track of time for me. It is important for us to keep in mind when we are evaluating the subjective and objective experiences of a spectator and spectated respectively. In Abhinava's aesthetic realm, it is the subject or the spectator who is of prime importance, because the real experience is the experience of the one who is experiencing it, in other words, the subject, and not of the one who is being experienced, in other words, object, right? In other words, the creative magical experience, now I'm going slowly. In other words, the creative magical experience that is often described by the words like pratibha or chamatkriti is manifested inside the locus in which the subject or the spectator is residing. Okay? The object of experience might be fictitious or erroneous, but the experience arising out of it is real according to Abhinavagupta. Here, from the mundane point of view, it is the spectator who is using his self-reflexive awareness that is actually performing in front of him. So it's like, basically what he's saying is that when you're watching a performance, because it's the subjective experience, so we are 10 people here and all 10 people have these different experiences. Why? Because I would understand it as I'm a subject. I would understand it as I want to understand it. That's my liberty. That's my autonomous nature, right? And his would be different, her would be different and stuff, right? Now I'm lost. From the mundane point of view, it is the spectator who is using the self-reflexive awareness that is actually performing in front of him. So he's watching the performance and he would see the performance. He would see the characters as he would want to see the characters in a way, right? That's why at certain point of time you have, for the character, you have this idea of patra. Patra is simply you have arguments before him that patra cannot hold, patra can only hold rasa, it cannot experience it. So if Akshay Kumar you have in front of you, he's, doing acting, for instance, he's not able to experience the rasa. In other words, even bhava, yes, because that's emotion, he has to get the emotion, but he's not able to experience it because he's busy, trying to get the moment right. Okay, I have to, oh yes, exactly, this is how the director said, and this is how, so he's busy getting that right. Okay, now I am relaxed, right? I'm watching the performance, I'm relaxed, right? So rasa, there's a again, rasa it's very complicated, as he just said, but I can say rasa is emerging in me, but he's just the carrier, he's just the holder of rasa. They give the example, for instance, there is a surapatra, for instance, you have the wine glass. The glass itself cannot experience the intoxication of the wine, but it can, it can get the wine to me and I can get intoxicated, for instance. So on and so forth. There are theoretical ideas and stuff, we can talk about that. Okay, which is important here. However, from the supramundane point of view, the spectator is Shiva himself, who is watching the divine play owing to his own inherent self-reflexive creativity. This is the reason why the idea of reposing, samvit vishranti, you have to, from there you have to go back to yourself. The divine, sorry, I get lost. This is the reason why the idea of reposing within one's own consciousness is emphasized by Abhinavagupta. Reposing back to one's own consciousness is nothing but getting back to one's own original state. You see, I'm trying every possible word to get it right, but it's difficult, right? Reposing back to one's own self is nothing but getting back to one's own original state and being able to rest in oneself. In other words, moving from duality to non-duality, right? Moving from thisness to I-ness. Let me explain a little more. I don't know if you're following things, but I have this chart. You see, I'll try to explain a few things. I think some of it would be complicated, but if you bear with me, just look at the map. I'll try to explain what's happening here, and I'll read few parts of it. To explain this further, Abhinava takes recourse to the theory of reflection. According to Abhinava, it is the Lord. He calls consciousness Lord. Sometimes it's also Devi, for instance, right? Who manifests as the universe while eliminating his own manifestation in form of both the original image and the reflected image. This is not making it clear. I can see that. What he's trying to say is that, this is very clear what happens. That Shiva, because of his complete autonomous nature at one point of time, there is this idea of Krida, which in some systems is like idea of Leela, for instance, right? He wants to enjoy. see, there would be the idea of Ananda coming, the bliss, right? I mean, there's this intricate relationship between Saundarya and Ananda, right? Bliss and beauty, right? We'll try to talk about that. But what he is doing, he's feeling that he wants to be. He wants to... See, I'm using the verb be, right? Because at one stage, if you can see, at that up stage there, it is just I, in the reposed form. It's just I. He wants, through the creative process, that is to say, the dynamic aspect of himself, he wants to be. When I say be, he is using that in Paratrishika Vivarana as in his realm of philosophy of language. You're using a verb. What is the idea of verb? It does. It's coming into being. I walk. If I say I'm just I, right? And I say I walk, I'm in act. That is where you have the duality. Duality not in the sense of the earlier ones, but it is coming in this realm of something distinguishing factor, right? So you have somewhere there Shiva and Shakti becoming I am. So there is that is the idea of you have Bimba and Pratibimba, right? So he has his own Bimba. He wants to see an image, right? In this, right? Just for his own sake, pleasure, right? And for our Ananda Shakti, we will be concerned with something like what is Shakti here, because this is Ananda Shakti, and Shiv is represented by Chit Shakti, right? So that Ananda Shakti is playing the games in the Rasa system, right? In this realm you have Shiva tantric ideas, and in that realm you have what is this idea of Ananda, for instance, right? You see, am I audible at all? Okay. This is in the tantric Shiva system. What happens is down there, this realm. This is the impure realm. That's what they call it, impure realm. Ashuddha Adva, impure path, impure realm. Now this is a certain process which takes place, and that realm there is basically the Shuddha Adva, the pure realm, right? Okay. Now this realm is the Sankhya realm, right? You have in the ontological structure, you have the idea of tattvas, for instance, in different Indian philosophical systems, Sankhya being one of the most ancient of them, and all other...
speak in the mic?
Sorry. So Sankhya system, all other philosophical systems have adhered to this structure, the ontic structure of Sankhya, for instance. And this is exactly what Abhinavagupta or his earlier systems, for instance, the tantric agamic systems, they added 11 more tattvas up there, right? So in other words, saying that this is not completely, in other words, this is mundane, this is realistic, right? This is realistic, this is this worldly, but there is another realm of 11 tattvas which is the Shuddha Adva, which is to be added to this system. So Abhinavagupta, for instance, he wouldn't reject the Sankhya system at all, right? He is just asking that, okay, I want to add 11 more, right? And there's a reason he follows his earlier systems, earlier Shaiva Siddhanta systems. He's getting his ontological ideas from there. That's clear. But why I'm bringing this here in what was supposed to be lecture on Rasa is because it's important to understand this, as I said, skeleton, the meat I will probably in some lecture put on top there. What is happening is that at one point of time, you see the idea of consciousness, Samvit Abhinavagupta has, or the Shaiva system as a whole has, it's a compact mass of consciousness, right? Now, I don't know what that means. I can't explain it. It's difficult to explain it. And it is dynamic. It is dynamic. Just imagine this Pepsi can. It's full of pressure. There is what he calls Samvit Ghana. Oh, Samvit Ghana. So that Ghana idea is that it's compact mass of consciousness. And everything, as he would say in one of his phrases, everything is of the nature of everything. That is to say, Sarvam Sarvatmakam. That is his kind of slogan. Everything is of the nature of everything. So, for instance, I am he is I, he is I. There is no differentiation as such, right? At one point of time, what happens is that, now I'm going from top up down to bottom, right? I'm going from top up down to bottom. He literally, at one point of time in Tantra Loka, he uses this example of saying, and I kind of rephrase it. Imagine you have a transparent banana with peel on top of it, but inside it's transparent, right? If I peel it, banana, and I throw the peel, what happens? There is nothing, right? I mean, there is nothing. This is something exactly you have at some point of time, when Shiva wants to come to this lower realm, that is to say, he wants to be two and he wants to extend himself. He wants to come into the Bheda Dasha, right? He wants to come into this differentiated form. What he does is, now the Swatantra Shakti is very important, the autonomous, complete autonomous nature, because everything is happening because of that, right? What he does is that he lets these guys, Kala, Vidya, Raga, Kala and Niyati. These are 5 Kanchukas. Kanchuka literally means this veil, right? On something which is transparent, which is pure, there is suddenly this veil coming into picture, right? There is nothing in the air, but suddenly there is veil coming, right? And you see this veil coming, and there is the idea of mala, right? Because impurity is lost, right? K.C. Pandey, he gives a very it's a way, because everybody finds it difficult to how to explain it, how to rephrase it. He gives an example. He says he takes the example of sea. He says it's sea of consciousness, right? That is very usual example. Sea of consciousness. Okay, what happens to that? At some point of time, there are 2 waves emerging in the sea of consciousness, right? All you have to, because you have to work with limited ideas, so all you have to keep in mind, they are simultaneously emerging. Now and they are part of sea at the same time, right? They cannot cease to be not sea, right? They are sea at the same time. These 2 waves are emerging. Now one wave is pure, nirmalata, prakasha, remember that idea. The other wave is impure, mala, remember that idea. In this you can reflect, in this you cannot reflect. It's like face in the mirror. If I want the mirror to reflect back in my face, it cannot, because this is not pure. I mean, I'm talking of mundane purity, right? I'm not talking of supramundane purity. Now, in this realm of consciousness, what happens is that these 2 waves, they go up, and this which has mala is able to reflect itself in something which is pure. At the same time, they are this consciousness, right? They are Shiva. But because of the nature of Shiva's swatantra, autonomous nature, they just move up, and for little while, they are able to reflect in each other. And this is what this world is, right? This is exactly what this world is for a temporary time. And then you go in a sabhagara, you go in a cinema theater, and you have that moment of joy only for that period of time, right? And you go out, and it is not. You come in, it is not. It's only that period of time when you are experiencing it, not before or after. And this is exactly what is happening here, Now, in the linguistic philosophy, what's happening is that you have I and you have am. Now, here you see in these 3 things what's happening. I am this, and I am this I am. There are these dual natures, and this I am. So this, when you say this I am, this comes forward, right? In other words, the Bheda, the differentiated world comes into being, right? Now, the effort has to be made, the differentiated world has to go back to repose, right? Now, how does that happen? That happens, wait, I had the charts. That happens somewhere like this, right? It's a continuous process going up and down and up and down and up and down. Now, this is from one point of view, creation, but then this is also explained in terms of, you see, he's a Kaula master as well, and he has this very strong sexual metaphors of sexual union, for instance, right? You have Shiva and you have Shakti, for instance. I have often explained, using his metaphors, Kaula metaphors, this idea of rasa, which I can imagine why he took recourse to this idea of sexual metaphor, right? So you really have to imagine that. I must say I am unmarried. You really have to imagine that. Okay. So what's happening is that, imagine there's a couple in copulation, right? And there are all different types of rasas, right, emerging. There is Shringara, obviously. There is Veera, there is Raudra, Bhayanaka. Everything is there. There is scratching. There is all kinds of things are there at that point of time. You have pain. You have pain, right? And so on and so forth, all the 8. There is something still you enjoy there, which is immanent and transcendent at the same time, right? So that pain doesn't remain pain. That's why in his system, ugliness is beauty, right? Something which is not acceptable otherwise in the system. That is a tantric influence, obviously, right? But sex is beauty, wine is beauty, meat is beauty. Oops, I shouldn't say that. or so on and so forth, right? Something what Brahmanical ideas actually advocated as, impure, he's bringing them into realms saying that how can anything be impure, right? Because it's you who is giving, cognition to that, right? It's in your samvit whether that is pure or impure, right? In reality, it may be whatever, right? And that's why even if you go to washroom and you have like something very filthy, it can be Shiva. Very much. You can have rasa experience there. Very much. It depends on you. According to Abhinavagupta, when the Chit Shakti starts dancing by the influence of Ananda Shakti. Now you see there, if you go back to this, see you have there somewhere 3rd, 4th, 5th, you have Sadashiva, Ishvara and Shuddha Vidya, you have Ichcha, Jnana and Kriya, right? These are the Pancha, these are the Shaktis, 3 Shaktis, and up there you have the Chid and Ananda, for instance, right? So what happens is that Chid Shakti is the absolute Shakti, right? I mean, he talks about, you see, it's complex. If you go to Tantra Loka, he starts talking about, things beyond that as well. But in different textual traditions, he has different ideas. However, Chit Shakti is up there. It's immanent and transcendent, both at the same time. And it's coming down at this level of Ananda, right? Because it has bliss. Chit has bliss, and they're always together, right? So Chit has bliss, and then it comes down to this idea of Ichha, okay, I want, and then there is Jnana, and Kriya is happening, right? This is same jnana you have in other systems, the knowledge part, which is on the top, for instance. Here, no, sorry. It's the chit which is on the top, right? And chit is experiencing bliss at certain point of time, because of which the things start happening, right? According to Abhinavagupta, when the Chit Shakti starts dancing by the influence of the Ananda Shakti, the Ananda helps create the Krida. The same Krida is nothing but the act of manifestation of Shiva. When there is an act of manifestation of Shiva's inner Krida, he lets the reflection of his inner power, Shakti, reflect on his own self. This is a little complicated, but I'll probably come to that. Thereafter, the creation beginning with Sadashiva to Prithvi comes into being. The universe is an outward appearance of the inner powers of the Great Lord. Even though there is outward appearance or manifestation of the inner power of Great Lord, yet the Lord does not undergo any change. He uses this, beautifully, the metaphor of mirror. Try to understand, because I spent a lot of time in understanding it, and it was after lots of time struggling with it, I understood it, what he means to say. Keep a mirror here, right? You're able to see things in there, right? I mean, from one point of view, you have this dynamic idea here, and I put a mirror here. I'm able to see everything, each one of you. I'm able to see chair in the same size, his face in the same size, camera and everything. Yet, the mirror is able to manifest everything of this diverse nature in totality, right? That oneness the mirror has. Now, this is an imperfect metaphor for explaining the perfect, because mirror has periphery, right? If I have to see him, I have to turn, yes, this side. It cannot have everything in it, right? So mirror has all kinds of limitations, for instance. I cannot, if I want to feel a woman, for instance, I cannot see the reflection of woman and touch the mirror, and it will not give me the same joy of touch, for instance, right? So it is sensitive only in case of rupa, form. It can give me form, right? Exact form probably, but again it's imperfect, because then we are talking of chit darpana, right? He would talk very often of the idea of chit darpana. The chit shakti is of the nature of this, but you have to imagine this is like, universal mirror, which is very, they use these pre-modern metaphors. It's very difficult to imagine them at times. Also the idea of mirror, for instance, what was their mirror? What were they using as mirror, for instance, that point of time? Okay, where am I? Even though there is outward appearance or manifestation of the inner power of great Lord, yet the Lord does not undergo any change, just as when a face is reflected in a mirror, the face does not undergo any change. Another important point is that a mirror is able to reflect within itself a limited image. There are limitations of periphery, etc., as I said, for instance, but these do not apply to the reflection of the divine. Reflection cannot take place outside of a mirror, for instance, and it has no separate existence outside of the mirror. At the same time, even though reflection can only take place within the mirror, the reflected image is very much a reality. But when it does reflect, it is by no means an illusion. For all Trika Shaivas, a mirror, an image reflected within the mirror, so I'm talking of three things, and its prototype, that is Pratibimba, all these are not three different components from absolute point of view, right? Because they all dissolve into this Chitghana, the consciousness, mass of consciousness. This system holds that from the absolute point of view, there is a certain uniformity in variety. But how do we explain variety? Variety is simply the manifested form of the unitary nature of reality. For instance, now this is my metaphor, tea, water, yogurt, wine, rain, and so forth have the unifying factor of liquidity. In the same way, uniformity exists within the variegated universe as well. However, as mentioned, the principle of reflection in our world works exactly opposite to how it works in the diverse world. I said in the beginning, I think, and I think many other philosophers senior philosophers like Professor Rastogi, Sanderson, and others, they do agree on this as well. Somewhere deep down, the philosophical intuition of Abhinavagupta lies in his Krama system. Now, don't ask me what is that. It's complicated, but it is a system which has, it's a metaphysical system which has the main deity in the pantheon as Kala Sankarshini. Now, Kala Sankarshini, worshipped as like these 12 metaphysical forms, literally it means someone who eats up time. Right, so there is gradation of what is the krama, right? There's gradation of these 12 kalis and how you're supposed to practice in that pantheon and so on and so forth. What I think, just for this briefness of the lecture, I would want to say is that how do you look at this whole system of his? Is that somewhere deep inside, there is this kernel that he has of the Krama system. And what he does is that he evolves it to the level that the outer, it's like a narikela phala, you have the coconut, for instance, right? So inside he has this Krama system which is soft, which is theological, highly theological in nature. You can't put lots of logic there, for instance, right? And he tries to create a very solid, you can understand my expression, a very solid analytical framework in the form of this Pratyabhignya Shastra, right? Having discourses with Buddhists, for instance, Dharmakirti, Dingnaga, Dharmottara, and like blowing them up, because they are Anatmavadins, and so there is a different game there, for instance, happening. But he creates that. He creates that edifice, right? Now the aesthetic world has been, it's also a different problem altogether, because ma'am is here, and she has done so much work on that, about the manuscripts and the textual tradition one has of Abhinavagupta and the Natya Shastra, which is so sparse. I mean, I have been trying to locate, for instance, the Sharada manuscripts of Abhinavagupta, and how is it possible that, transmission of the manuscripts of Abhinavagupta right from Abhinavagupta there in Kashmir, we have it existing down there in Tiruvananthapuram and a couple of them in Madras and nothing else, right? So what was happening? I mean, where was Abhinavagupta being read, for instance, and who was engaging with it over the period of time? So from that point of view, also, I'm here. I can't go into the textual problems here. It's more of, but those are another set of problems that one has to face. If you go into the Tantra Loka, for instance, all sorts of problems. You don't know what he's trying to say. Go to the manuscript, try to read it. Again, there are problems. All kind of those problems. However, I think this much is clear that what the process that is happening. This his objective, his project, his larger project. That is clear what he is trying to do. So this is what I have tried, I think, to sum up somewhere. But the other thing, this goddess Kala Sankarshini is, it is a sort of this manifestation of this reflective nature, right? I don't know how am I sounding when I say that, but if you go to really Tantra Loka 4, which is all about the Krama system, and he gives definitions, one by one, 5 definitions of Kala Sankarshini. What does it, what is the nature of this goddess at the first place? There's no iconographic detail, but the very nature. Its very nature, as you see this Prakasha Vimarsha idea, its very nature is a reflexive nature, right? Now you see in mystic ideas, these ideas of Bimba and Pratibimba, light and Vimarsha, they have deep meanings, right? And it's not always easy to understand. It's not always easy to easily understand, like, what is he talking about. That said, I think I should just finish by a couple of comments on Shanta. My thesis, what I said in the beginning, was that I want to see, for instance, you see, Abhinavagupta has system of 4 upayas, right? In the Malini Vijayottara Tantra, which is the basis for his system, there are 3 upayas mentioned. Abhinavagupta in the Tantra Loka mentions, he adds up one more upaya, which is Anupaya. He says it's means without means. And he gives it so much importance that he is having the second, that is to say, in Tantra Loka, first chapter is introduction. Second chapter, he names the chapter Anupaya, right? And then third is Shambhava, Shakta, Anava, and so on and so forth. And then he discusses in there the ontology of Anupaya. Now, Anupaya, means without means, from one point of view, is nothing but the most intensified form of the reflective upaya, that is Shambhava upaya. Because Shambhava upaya is where this idea of reflection, now when I say idea of reflection, what he has there, idea of reflection, is a yogi, for instance, because it's for advanced yogis, I said that the system is for that. So every dancer also should be looked upon as the advanced yogi. The system he has there, a yogi is able to create by the intensity of imagination, right? It doesn't need a prototype. That is to say, it doesn't need bimba for pratibimba, right? Because for something to see in mirror, I should have the prototype, I should have the face or something, whatever I want to look. No. I don't know how many of you are familiar with this idea of what he calls in Sanskrit prasena. It is this medieval European oracle, for instance. It manifests an image. You just want to see things of future, and the image is manifested, right? But there is no bimba there. There is no original image of that. It's just manifesting by itself. Like, for instance, a yogi, right? I mean, something manifests by itself. He wants and it manifests. That is what eventually he calls pratibimba, right? And that you have to imagine exactly how Shanta works. Intensified form, the most intensified form of this mixture of all the 8, right? And as Navtesh said some time back, it's not something you're looking here, you're looking there. It is and it is not. No, I don't know how to use the language. It is and it is not, but it is the most intensified form of some kind of experience that he talks about, right? Which has as its base all of these there somewhere, right? And if you try to see Abhinavagupta chapter 6, there in the end, he has Shantarasa Prakarana, right? And the Shantarasa Prakarana, you can see that very clearly. It's exactly like what he does in terms of what he's doing in Tantra Loka, asking for this ontological status for Anupaya, asking for this ontological status for Shantarasa, right? He says it is beyond, it is Tritiya Rashi, he uses it. It's something beyond this and that, right? So on the one level you have Bimba and Pratibimba, but on the other level you have the totality idea, as in other words, the reflection of it, the reflective, the intensified form of it, right? Somewhere I also feel, you see in Tantra Loka first, what he does is that he's getting this idea of, he very beautifully puts it that I am a Swayambhuva, born by myself. He venerates his father, Narasimha Gupta, and here, Vimala, and he says that I am. Now look at this. This is my interpretation of it. He's looking at the Bimba and Pratibimba, and then you have something which is the third entity which is arising out of it, right? And in Kula Shastra, that is to say, his system, other system, Kula Shastra, there is where he kind of seems to be suggesting that, this third entity, like father and mother, a child is born. He's both, but he's ontologically something very different at the same time, but he's representing both. He's the representative of both, right? So he is and is not, because as far as the independence of his own ontological status is concerned, he's different, he's separate, he has this independence, but at the same time he is both, right? Now it's paradoxical sometimes, right? But he is asking for the ontological status of paradox itself. That's what he seems to be doing. He's like, you say it's paradox, why can't paradox be there? The fact that something is paradox is not that it is not there, right? I will stop just reading a few, I think, concluding observations. Yeah. Sorry, I have been just reading. Okay. I began with an observation saying that I would like to establish a connection between the Anupaya on the Tantric side and Shantarasa on the aesthetic side of Abhinavagupta. One of the unique features of Abhinavagupta's Trika is the addition of Anupaya, which I just said, and so on and so forth. The independent nature of Anupaya is mentioned only to signify the intention of reintegrating the two components involved in this process, the means and the goal. Thus, it is only by following the means of Shambhavopaya that one is to reach Anupaya. Similarly, Shantarasa should be seen as the most intensified form of the totality version of the idea of rasa. It is only through the means of the other rasas that the experience of Shanta can manifest. In his Metaphysics of Beauty, Abhinava emphasizes the conceptualization of Shaktis as creative vibration, that is to say, the Spanda system that originally where his non-dualistic idea comes from. He emphasizes the conceptualization of Shaktis as creative vibration in the concept of the experience of rasa. He describes the aesthetic relishing as an immersion in Spanda, the creative vibration. A beautiful thing, he would say, is the reflection of the original. This is very important. A beautiful thing, now I'm lost. He would say is the reflection of the original. So reflection in his idea is beauty, I mean this reflection, a new idea, creative idea, it's beautiful. Then even if you want to make a comparison, then even the prototype, okay? For him, everything, whatever is beautiful, is blissful. But not everything, whatever is blissful, is necessarily always beautiful. That is his sort of philosophical gimmick. He establishes the Ananda as Vyapaka and Saundarya as Vyapya, thus creating a Vyapya Vyapaka Bhava between the two. Ananda is nothing but the state of one's mind, heart, being. This is again very important thing somewhere, He talks, you see this experience of, you take a piece of cloth, you put it in water, right? It's completely drenched, soaked in water. Emotion, rasa, that's what rasa does to you. Emotion, you're soaked. You see the metaphor, right? I mean, you're soaked into that. Ardri karana. That's what he uses. Ardri karana, completely soaked from top to bottom. The state of overflowing chamatkara is sahrdayata. This is what the chamatkara, you can use the word magical experience or whatever you want to say, it's difficult, is sahrdayata. He also uses the word the hridaya samvada, for instance. It is the samvada, it is the dialogue between two hearts. There's importance of heart in his also metaphysical and also pratyabhijna system. The state of overflowing chamatkara is sahrdayata, and its nature is that of the virya kshobha. In the notion of kala, for the origin, both the origin and destination, or both cause and effect, is beauty. That is to say, in his, I'm giving you this in the end, the sort of assorted ideas related to his beauty. But there's a lot. I think in Tantra Loka, if you read, I showed you this. You see, if you try to look up there, you have A, and then you have her here, and then you have ma down there, right? So this aham, you're going out, and then you want to come in, right? And that is the circular process there you have. You see, for instance, in the Kaulik system, you can look at the idea of intercourse in there, right? You have a withdrawal there, you have rest, you have arousal, you have emission, then again it goes back to this withdrawal, right? In the process of ascend and descend, which he calls, to borrow the Spandakarika's terminology, the unmesha and nimesha, right? And you have this idea of, which is sometimes also commentators define, I think Shemaraja, the opening up of the eyes of Shiva and closing the eyes of Shiva. But this is also something like, you have this sexual arousal, and then you are in act, and then it's down there, right? Like you watch a performance, for instance, it's almost like, a sexual intercourse. And he is very clear about that. If you read Tantra Loka 29, for instance, how he tries to kind of, unfortunately, this tantric idea, I was telling, I think, Navtej, yesterday, I was talking to a Nayayika somewhere, and he said, what do you do? I study Tantra. Oh, you do bathroom, toilet stuff, right? Which is very complicated, and it's something that people don't understand, these metaphors, people don't understand. I'm not saying they're only metaphors, it's very clear from 29, they are rituals, for instance. But then it's important to understand them at the first place. Like, what is he talking about, right? What is this arousal, emission, rest? What does it mean? How is it, synonymizing these? How is he synonymizing these ideas with, for instance, the Natya idea, the Rasa idea, in the Pratyabhijna idea? How is he doing that? And he's a master of that. He's a master of that. He does that so sophisticatedly, right? Okay, conclusion. There is no conclusion, but I'm just like reading the last part. The homology between Abhinavagupta's aesthetics and his soteriology may be understood as a further extension of the generic monastic Shaiva mythico-ritual structure of realizing the self, that is to say Shiva, through the discourse of Shakti, what he calls the Shakti Avishkarana, the Avishkarana, the realization, you try to explore back Shakti Avishkarana. Insofar as Shakti is immanent within ordinary emotions, the structures of language and other components of literature and drama. And an appreciation of this structure seems to be emerging in the studies of the relations between the two areas of Abhinavagupta's thought. Sahardaya is the one who has the capacity of tasting, at the same time letting oneself get immersed into the reflective awareness of his own chamatkara, which is You see, Chamatkara sometimes, many a times, he would use this idea of bhoga and moksha, right? I was just telling, I think we talked a lot. I was just telling Navteej yesterday that if Abhinavagupta would have written, Yoga Sutra, or he would have commented on it, the second sutra would have been Yogaha Chittavritti Sambhogaha, not Nirodha, because there is no idea of Nirodha. You can't, cessation is not there. Now, Sambhoga is Samyaktaya Bhogaha. You should know how to relish. That is beauty, right? If you know how to relish, that methodology of relishing, if you know that, it doesn't really matter whether you're looking at a piece of filth or you're looking at the glorious Shiva. It's same, right? But if you know the art of beauty, which I guess I don't know how many do. Okay, I'll stop here. I think I took a lot of time.